We talk a lot about how phones and social media affect young people's well-being. But there's another thing, one that doesn't get talked about as much, that studies show we ought to be paying more attention to: perfectionism. Thomas Curran is an author and professor at the London School of Economics, and he recently looked at 35 years of data and found that when young people feel more pressure to be perfect, it has a significant negative impact on their well-being. And surveys show that fear is getting worse. And the reason for that rise doesn't seem to be phones or social media or even overly demanding parents. It's something stranger.
We looked at broader macroeconomic trends alongside the trends of perfectionism, and what we saw was something really curious. Economic inequality closely tracked the acceleration in concern. So the more inequality you have in a society, the more concern you have in a society, right? The more stratified people are, the more severe the consequences of failure. And so inequality, a broader macro factor, is tracking these trends far better than technology does. Unfortunately, it's a bit more complicated than just saying, let's take the phones away.
So, Thomas, I think a lot of people are talking about the well-being of young people, and they're pointing to phones and social media and screen time. But your research tells a rather different story. What have you found?
That's right. We've done an extensive piece of research that takes about 35 years worth of college student data in the US, UK, and Canada. It's about almost 100,000 students in there. And what we're seeing is rises in a couple of broad dimensions of perfectionism. One of them is called perfectionistic striving. So this is this idea of, really high standards, go-getting qualities, trying to be the best and then some. Those are what some people consider to be healthy forms of perfectionism. I would argue that they're not as healthy as perhaps at first glance, but that's for another day. And then you have this second dimension of perfectionism, which is just as, if not more important, actually, when it comes to understanding how perfectionism impacts our lives. And that's perfectionistic concerns, not feeling like we're enough, thinking that other people are judging us, they're watching us, they're ready for us to make mistakes, fears about failures. Those concerns are specifically what's skyrocketing. So that's why we're concerned. If it was just strivings, we'd probably be more relaxed about it. But it's the concerns element of perfectionism that's really ramping up in recent years. It's an accelerating trend, and it's up about 40% over the last 35 years. That's massive. And when you look at the relationships in the literature between perfectionism and mental health, they are always driven by concerns. It's the concerns that is winning that kind of internal tug of war between the strivings and the concerns. So we're seeing across that 35-year period, perfectionism rise quite fast. And we argue in our paper that's a problem for young people.
So according to your data, the data that you've studied, you see this skyrocketing around the year 2000, which obviously is before cell phones, before social media. What do you think is causing it?
The reason why we think that's happening is because we looked at broader macroeconomic trends alongside the trends of perfectionism, and what we saw was something really curious. Economic inequality, so a macroeconomic factor, that closely tracked the acceleration in concern. So the more inequality you have in a society, the more concern you have in a society, right? The more stratified people are, the more severe the consequences of failure. And so inequality, a broader macro factor, is tracking these trends far better than technology does. Now, that's not to say technology doesn't have a role. We think it certainly has a role in amplifying these pre-existing trends, but they are not the sole cause.
And just to be clear, Thomas, you are seeing a rise in income inequality and a rise in the stresses around perfectionism. The two are linked to each other.
Well, they're linked correlationally, so the two go hand in hand. But we cannot say for certain that rising inequality is causing concerns to increase, nor, frankly, does any of the research that's often cited to support relationship between cell phone use and mental health issues either. All of this work is correlational. It's one of the big problems in the field. But, when a lot of correlations tend in a certain direction, you can begin to get a picture of what might be happening.
And so this would suggest, if this is the case, that actually people are striving for perfectionism because they are given a choice in life, which is that even if you're not perfectionist, you're not going to reach those upper echelons of society, and there isn't much middle left. I mean, they've got a point, haven't they? I mean, if you're a young person looking at an increasingly, what economists like to call this K-shaped economy or stratified society, maybe they should all be striving for perfectionism, because otherwise they're going to be left out at the top and there's not much middle to fall into.
But that's why it's a very rational response. Like a lot of people point to perfectionism as a very individualistic vulnerability to say that, we just need to snap ourselves out of it. But this is a systemic problem. Perfectionism is very much in society, in the economy. The economy runs on a deficit model. It has to grow in order to survive, and growth thrives on scarcity. When the society becomes more unequal, we feel like we have to compensate with more concern about where we sit in the social hierarchy. And that's not just young people. I have to point this out. That's also parents too. In fact, maybe more so parents. Parents are the primary conduits of societal pressures when it comes to the developing child. They're the ones that see society shifting, trends shifting, AI coming on the scene, creating havoc with entry-level jobs, inequality rising, we just mentioned, growth stalling, so opportunities are falling. Parents see all these things and they respond quite naturally. You got an A, that's great, but keep going, right? It's this constant pressure, subtle, but it's because we're responding to what's going on in wider society.
Do you think we've been thinking about perfectionism wrong? Do you think we as parents, I've got 4 kids, and teachers and society have been thinking about perfectionism in the wrong way?
A little bit. I think it's this tacitly assumed that perfectionism is a necessary evil, so to speak. Our favorite flaw might be a better way of putting it. And therefore, we need a little bit of it to get ahead. The data, by the way, are very clear on this. It doesn't help you achieve. And there's a couple of reasons for that. One is perfectionists burn out a lot because they work way too hard. But the other one is actually more interesting, is that they're master self-sabotagers. So they procrastinate, they're indecisive, they don't get started on things because it's too challenging, right? The anticipated shame and guilt of failing is so strong that they just don't get started. You can't fail at something you don't try, right? So there's this push and pull in perfectionism where they work too hard and not hard enough all at the same time, and all of it culminates in no better performance. So I think it's really important to bust this myth that perfectionism carries us forward. I think if we can do that at a societal level, that would help a great deal, because then that points our compass in directions where we can, think about better ways of striving. Things like conscientiousness, diligence, perseverance, all of these things are really good qualities, way better than perfectionism.
So actually, in this era of income inequality, those perfectionists might be thinking to themselves, I've got to be perfectionist to make it into that top bracket, because there isn't a middle class anymore. I've got to go for the very top, and therefore I've got to work my bum off and try to be as perfect as I can be. But what you're saying is it doesn't even get them there. It doesn't actually help them achieve the things they think they're achieving.
No, it holds us back. And the data is clear on that. That's not just me just telling you this is my opinion. The data is very clear. When you look at meta-analytical work that studies all the relationships between perfectionism and performance, there is you get no benefit perfectionism. What you do get is more anxiety and less satisfaction with your performance. But in terms of objective performance, no benefit. So it's a myth that perfectionism makes us successful.
Let's say you were giving advice to a parent, to a school principal or a counsellor, or even a young person themselves right now. What would you suggest to them to be thinking about on the basis of this kind of growth of income inequality and their own well-being?
Well, I think the single biggest factor is continually supporting your children, even in what are very, very competitive circumstances, and unconditional support. It's fine to set standards for kids and want them to do well. None of that's an issue, but you have to treat kids the same if they succeed as if they don't quite get the grade that they wanted, and also model in yourself how you respond to setbacks and failures in healthy, constructive ways, by humanizing them, normalizing them. Even the more you can teach young people that their self-worth isn't conditioned on their outward achievements, the less perfectionism has power over them.
Thomas Curran, thank you. That was a perfect way to end. Thank you very much.
No, thank you very much.